High school biology usually gives us, a very specific clinical definition of what it means to be alive.
Right, yeah. Their textbook.
Exactly. You picture the textbook diagrams, right? Like a cell wall, a nucleus, strands of DNA spinning around like a twisted ladder.
Hmm.
We're taught to view the foundation of existence through this purely material lens. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, just firing in sequence to create a highly complex biological machine.
And I mean, it's a comforting framework because it's quantifiable. You can put a cell under a microscope, measure its components, and definitively say, this is lice.
Right. It's safe.
Yeah, it's safe. But that purely physical definition completely ignores the subjective experiential weight of being alive. It mirrors the hardware, but completely ignores the operating system running in the background.
Which is exactly why we are looking at a perspective today that takes that entire biological blueprint, throws it out the window, and replaces it with something profoundly intangible. We are so glad you could join us for today's deep dive.
Yes, welcome.
Today we are diving into a philosophical piece written by Shuai in October 2023, titled Analysis of the Three Treasures of Life: Affection, Love, and Sex. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore how this source material fundamentally redefines those three concepts.
And it really is a fundamental redefinition.
It is. The author doesn't treat affection, love, and sex as mere human feelings or psychological quirks. This framework argues they are the literal universal building blocks for every single living thing.
And we really need to clarify a crucial distinction the source makes right up front. The author frequently capitalizes the word life. They aren't just talking about biological survival like having a pulse and brainwaves.
Right, it's bigger than that.
Much bigger. Capital L life is treated almost as a cosmic substance, like a measurable energetic state. The core argument here is that actively expanding your capacity for affection, love, and sex is the exact mechanism by which you elevate your literal level of existence within this cosmic hierarchy.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly grasp how these treasures elevate human life, we have to start by establishing how fundamental they are. And the source material does this by dragging us all the way down to the very bottom of the food chain.
Yeah, it completely removes human exceptionalism.
Right. The baseline established here is incredibly inclusive. The premise is that absolutely all living beings possess these three treasures.
All of them.
And that explicitly includes plants, trees, flowers, and grass. The author asserts that a blade of grass growing out of a sidewalk crack is operating the same fundamental anatomy of affection, love, and sex as a human being.
It's wild to think about.
It is, and my immediate instinct is to view that as poetry. I mean, we've all heard the old wives' tale about talking to your houseplants or playing Mozart for your ferns to help them grow.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But I've always rationalized that as a metaphor, a psychological trick that just gets humans to pay closer attention to the watering schedule and the soil quality. So I have to ask, is the author genuinely arguing that a ficus plant is literally experiencing fear, anxiety, and love?
There's zero metaphor intended in this piece. None.
Wow.
The philosophy relies on a mechanism of energetic resonance. According to the text, plants are not just passive biological ornaments. They are highly sensitive, energetic receivers.
Okay.
The source states that a single flower, when nurtured by a loving person, will flourish. Its colors become vibrant, its fruit becomes sweet. Conversely, if that exact same flower is nurtured by someone filled with hate or internal chaos, it will weaken and die, regardless of how meticulously it is watered.
Wait, really? So just the energy alone?
Exactly. The plant physically absorbs the energetic frequency of its caretaker.
Okay, so the plant is receiving affection through that energetic transaction. I can kind of follow that. But the idea that it actually expresses love and sex feels much harder to wrap my head around. How does, like, a willow tree manifest those traits?
Well, by analyzing its physical outputs as intentional offerings. The shade a tree provides, the oxygen it releases, the specific fragrance of its blooms, the author categorizes all of these as direct outward expressions of the plant's love for its environment.
Okay, that's beautiful. What about the sexuality aspect?
That part is even more literal. Plant pollination is their sexual activity. Trees like poplars and willows or various grasses have male and female distinctions. They actively exchange energy elements between these parts. In this framework, that botanical exchange is fundamentally no different than human sexuality.
Wow.
What's fascinating here is how this perspective forces a complete paradigm shift. We are deeply conditioned to view complex emotional states as the absolute pinnacle of human achievement. We use our capacity for love to separate ourselves from, lower life forms.
Right, to put ourselves on a pedestal.
Exactly. This philosophy shatters that ego. It insists that you are sharing the exact same baseline physiological and energetic processes with the moss on a rock.
Which is incredibly humbling, honestly. But it also creates an immediate logical puzzle. If my dog, the moss on the rock, and I are all operating with the exact same three building blocks of affection, love, and sex,
Right.
how does this system differentiate between lower and higher forms of life? I mean, we clearly aren't experiencing reality in the exact same way. How does a life form actually elevate its status?
The differentiation all comes down to a concept the author calls domain.
Domain, okay.
Specifically, the domain of your affection. Think of affection as the aperture on a camera lens.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. If your aperture is tiny, you only let in a tiny sliver of light. In this philosophy, if your emotional domain is narrow, meaning you only hold affection for yourself or perhaps just one or two other people, your level of life is mathematically low. You are operating on a highly restrictive frequency.
So the radius of your care is small. But let me push back on this. On behalf of anyone listening who deeply values their inner circle.
Sure.
Because human society is practically built on the survival mechanism of the in-group. We celebrate the tight-knit nuclear family. We romanticize the whole idea of us against the world.
We do, yeah.
If I dedicate my entire existence to fiercely protecting and caring for my spouse and my children, is this framework genuinely arguing that my devotion is holding me back evolutionarily?
Yes, and that is definitely one of the most challenging aspects of this text.
Really?
Yeah. Devoting yourself exclusively to a tiny in-group is viewed as a form of emotional stuntedness.
Yeah.
It is an evolutionary bottleneck. The author argues that the connotation of your affection determines your life's level. To elevate, you simply must widen the aperture. Having affection for all people creates a vast domain, raising your level of life.
But the expansion doesn't stop at humanity, does it? The author stretches this radius out to a scale that is almost difficult to comprehend.
Oh, absolutely. To reach the absolute highest realms, what the text describes as the level of heaven or the realm of gods, your affection has to transcend biology entirely.
Right.
You have to cultivate genuine active affection for mountains, rivers, and the land. The source even pushes it out into the cosmos, stating you must hold affection for the sun, the moon, and the stars.
If we look at the mechanics of that, it means moving from a transactional view of affection to a purely environmental one. I mean, I can't expect the sun to hug me back.
Exactly.
Cultivating affection for the stars requires a complete detachment from getting any return on your emotional investment. And the consequences of failing to do this, of shrinking your domain, are laid out in incredibly stark terms in the text.
The warning is brutal, honestly. It states that if a life loses these three treasures, it loses its vitality entirely. A human operating without expansive affection, love, and sex is compared to a stone, a mummy, or a walking corpse.
The phrase used is physical automaton. You might have a biological pulse like your carbon and oxygen are still doing their job, but on an energetic level, the current has been completely shut off.
Yeah.
You are basically inanimate.
Because you have restricted the flow of life to such a narrow point that it essentially dries up.
So if affection is the aperture, the radius of what we care for, stretching from our living room all the way out to the cosmos, we need to clearly separate that from love.
Yes, they are distinct.
The source material treats love as something structurally different from affection. It defines love as the actual non-material structure of life.
All right. I like to think of affection as the foundation or maybe the plot of land you've purchased,
Okay.
while love is the actual architecture built on top of it. It is the structural integrity of your existence.
Yeah.
And just like affection, this architecture scales based on your capacity.
Makes sense.
The author posits that if you only love a few people throughout your entire life, your non-material structure is rudimentary. It's barely distinguishable from an animal's structure.
But if you expand that architecture to encompass all sentient beings, the non-material structure becomes perfected. You reach what the text calls the level of angels and bodhisattvas.
Exactly.
The sheer volume of objects you love reinforces your internal structural integrity.
And the most vital characteristic of this perfected architecture is its permanence. The text describes love as an unshakable state manifested by life. It is entirely independent of external circumstances.
Yes.
Your love shouldn't fluctuate just because your environment changes or because the object of your affection behaves badly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that definition completely dismantles the way modern society approaches relationships.
Oh, it completely upends it.
We are deeply addicted to conditional love. We treat love like a battery. It's highly transactional, like, I love you because you provide for me, or I love you because you validate my opinions. And when you stop doing those things, my battery drains and I withdraw the love.
The author takes a very hard line against that transactional model. If someone loves another person because of their wealth, their power, or even just what they can offer emotionally, that is not an expression of life. That is an ego-driven contract. It is driven purely by self-interest.
To illustrate the alternative, the text uses a very specific metaphor, which I love. It says, the orchid grows in a secluded valley, not needing people to appreciate its beauty.
It's a gorgeous image.
It is, but the psychological implication is really intense. It suggests that our desperate need for spoken love, our need to hear I love you, and have our value validated by an audience, is actually a symptom of a weak non-material structure.
That's the core mechanism of the orchid metaphor. The orchid doesn't announce its presence to the valley. It doesn't wither if no hiker walks by to compliment its petals.
Right.
It simply exists in a state of beauty. The text argues that love, which must be spoken, is not true love. True love is manifested. It is an ongoing state of radiation, much like a solar panel.
Oh, I see.
The solar panel doesn't require a transaction to work. It passively generates power just by existing under the sun. If your love requires constant verbal contracts or a return on investment, your architecture is fragile.
So we have the aperture of affection extending to the stars. We have the non-material architecture of love acting like a passive, radiant solar panel. But you can't have a functioning system without a physical engine to drive it. And that brings us to the most provocative shift in the text. The author grounds us aggressively back into the physical body with the third treasure, sex.
The transition from the profoundly non-material to the intensely physical is jarring, but it's logically necessary within this framework. If love is the non-material structure, the author defines sexuality as a characteristic of the physical structural composition of life.
And crucially, the author links this physical structure directly to spiritual freedom. This is where the text really deviates from traditional philosophical models.
Usually.
How exactly are the mechanics of sex defined here?
It is defined purely as an energetic transaction. Sex is the necessary exchange of energy with the opposite sex. The author asserts that every species has unique sexual characteristics, but the universal thread is this energetic fuel transfer.
Okay.
The text argues that a life form requires this specific energy to satisfy its internal desires and to manifest what it calls relatively perfect characteristics.
So within this operating system, sex isn't primarily about procreation, and it isn't just a pursuit of dopamine or pleasure. It is a vital mechanical exchange of energetic fuel required for a life form to actually reach its full evolutionary potential.
Exactly.
And by establishing that mechanism, the author paints the suppression of this energy in incredibly dark, volatile terms.
Yeah, the suppression of sexuality is categorized as a literal pathological trap. Think about a physical exhaust pipe on an engine.
Okay.
If you block the exhaust, the pressure doesn't just disappear. It builds up until it damages the engine block. The author argues that when sexual desires are unfulfilled, the individual becomes severely unbalanced psychologically.
The trapped energy mutates.
Yes. The text draws a direct line from repressed sexuality to a cascade of destructive emotions: anxiety, restlessness, irritability, and ultimately physical violence. The trapped energy vents itself through anger, jealousy, and resentment. But the true danger, according to the author, is what this pressure does to your non-material structure.
The architecture we talked about earlier.
Exactly. The internal conflict becomes so violent that it literally fractures your capacity to love. If you are constantly at war with your own biological need for energetic exchange, you have no bandwidth left to radiate unconditional love like the orchid in the valley.
Wow.
As your capacity for love declines, your non-material structure degrades, and you physically drift toward the lower realms of life.
I have to throw up a massive red flag here, though, because this directly contradicts thousands of years of global religious tradition.
It certainly does.
I mean, when you look at Buddhism, early Christianity, or various yogic traditions, you see strict asceticism. You see monks and nuns taking lifelong vows of celibacy, and that severe biological restriction is upheld as the ultimate pristine path to spiritual enlightenment.
Right.
How on earth does this author reconcile elevated God-level spirituality with the full, unbridled indulgence of biological desires?
The author doesn't shy away from that contradiction at all. In fact, they address it by reinterpreting one of the most famous religious quotes in history. To dismantle the ascetic argument, the text quotes Jesus Christ. In heaven, there is neither marrying nor giving in marriage.
Well, the conventional interpretation of that quote has always been that in the afterlife, humans are scrubbed of their dirty physical desires. We become pure, genderless, spiritual beings floating on clouds, right?
That is the ascetic view, yes. But this philosophy flips the mechanics of that quote entirely upside down. The author interprets Jesus' words not as a call for celibacy, but as a stark warning against artificial restriction.
The restriction of the domain.
Precisely. Remember the aperture of affection. The text argues that the institution of marriage inherently forces your emotional love and sex domains to become narrow.
Oh, wow.
By legally and spiritually committing to exchange energy with only one specific person for the rest of your life, you are artificially shrinking your radius. You're putting a cap on your energetic exchange. Therefore, the institution makes a life fundamentally unsuitable for heaven, because the realm of heaven requires vast, completely unrestricted domains.
Okay, that is fascinating.
This raises an important question about what true freedom actually looks like in practice. The author isn't just suggesting we be a little more open-minded.
Yeah.
They are making a radical structural declaration about the requirements for evolution.
The text reaches a bold, absolute conclusion. It says that to become an advanced life form, you cannot wage war on your biology. You must fully satisfy your sexual needs.
Yes.
The author synthesizes this entire argument with one incredibly provocative statement. Sexual freedom is the ultimate freedom of life.
Because you simply cannot reach the expansive, radiant level of gods or angels while simultaneously putting a chokehold on your domains of affection, your manifestation of love, or your energetic exchange of sex.
Right, it's contradictory.
Completely. To be truly vitally alive, to possess capital L life, all three treasures must be running at full capacity, completely unleashed.
So, what does this all mean? If we zoom out and look at the entire operating manual presented in this text, the core takeaway is a radical shift in personal responsibility.
It really is.
To evolve from a mummy or a disconnected stone into an advanced, vibrant life form, you have to actively stress your own operational capacity.
You have to fundamentally dismantle the idea that you are a separate, isolated biological unit fighting against the world.
You have to force the aperture of your affection open until it encompasses the rivers, the mountains, and the stars.
Yeah.
You have to build a non-material architecture of love that radiates passively without demanding a transactional reward. And you have to embrace emotional and sexual freedom as vital, energetic engines driving your evolutionary journey, rather than viewing them as shameful earthly flaws that need to be suppressed.
It demands that you view every single interaction not as a passing moment, but as an energetic exchange that literally dictates your current level of existence.
Which is a beautiful, heavy realization to carry with you. We are so conditioned to think of evolution as this slow, blind process happening to our DNA over millions of years. But this framework suggests that evolution is happening right now, in real time, within your chest, based entirely on the expanding scope of your empathy.
It takes the most abstract, esoteric, spiritual concepts and grounds them into the immediate practical reality of your Tuesday afternoon.
It really does. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you step back into your routine today.
Yeah.
If expanding our affection to things as distant and inanimate as the sun, the moon, and the stars, literally and physically elevates our life level, how might that reframe your daily mundane interactions?
Well, that's a great question.
If you viewed every single encounter you have today, whether it's a deeply frustrating conversation with an irritating stranger, a passing glance at a poplar tree on your commute, or simply stepping on a blade of grass, what if you viewed every single one of those moments as a literal, mechanical opportunity to evolve your own species level of existence?
It undeniably changes how you look at a weed growing through the pavement.
It changes everything. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of life. We hope it gave you an entirely new lens through which to view the world today. Keep exploring.